Go live. I am live. Okay. Woo, few too many links in that chain. Yeah. I am hoping this will work. We seem to be having some delay on the stream, but you guys are on. Thank you. All right. So, what I would like to do at this point is, first of all, have each of you check in. I'll just sort of use the comments as attendance. That's kind of easy. But also, I'd like you to comment on whether the signal is clear, whether there's any dropouts in the audio. I'm getting a warning from YouTube that my upload speed seems to be too slow to work, although when I look at my Linux status screen, it actually looks okay. So I'm not sure which one to believe at this point. Yeah, okay. Well, and since that warning is still up there, it looks like that's going to still be a problem. But let's just keep going. So, if you can actually text in, say something. Hello, can you text in? So try doing that. Okay. Oh, right. Yeah. So Emma says it's good. Mary says it's good. Good. So Mary says there's no lag in the audio. All right. So all right. Interesting. So I'm getting a delay from you guys in that case. It's actually, although the signal is coming through clearly to you, we may have as much as a 25-second delay. So, food for thought. Again, this is maybe one reason to consider Zoom. However, I don't think anything is going to work well even as a test until I get better internet connection in my house. I had to do a lot in the back end in order to make it even possible for this streaming to go through well. Okay. Oh, and Beatrice is on. I thought Beatrice was traveling, so well done, Beatrice. Okay. All right. So I've been reading comments on what you guys were looking at with big deals. Oh, by the way, although it's very, very cropped, what I'm showing in the background is slides of San Francisco, and some of those outdoor slides are from the Hetch Hetchy Reservoir, which in some ways is part of San Francisco. So in terms of commenting on my slides, the one thing to think about Hetch Hetchy Reservoir and Yosemite in general is that if Hetch Hetchy is where we collect water for San Francisco, and that whole area of Yosemite Park is actually this very clean water collection area for the city of San Francisco. In a way, much of Yosemite National Park is actually part of the urban infrastructure of the city of San Francisco. Food for thought. And that's important in thinking about, well, what is the nature of urbanization? And urbanization, to some degree, has to do with where all the buildings are and where the high density of population is. Sure, that's part of it. But another part of urbanization is the areas that the city itself directly influences. So the places where products are brought in directly, things like some urban planners talk about the milk shed of a city, because milk is always sourced locally. So you can kind of look at the extent of a metropolis from how far away people get milk. In our case, water supply means that part of the city of San Francisco extends clear across California to the Nevada border. As with Metro LA, because they have the Owens Valley. What else? So, the energy supply, so that's sort of immediate in terms of electrical needs. And for San Francisco, some of that electrical supply comes from the Shasta Dam, so that's up in the northern end of the Sacramento Valley. So there's an extended space of urbanism and urban infrastructure, which is well beyond where we see the buildings and the dense population. Okay, So now on to the question in Chapter 12 about big deals. So some of you, I really appreciate your comments. I think you got a general sense of the chapter. Now that we've talked about CEQA, EIRs, and the serious barriers to development, then what we're looking at in Chapter 12 is really the workaround for that, which is having large developers figure out what they're going to do in a specific area. All right, Seth, good. I'm glad it's good. Tariq, thanks. Very encouraging to hear you guys. Paige is saying it's not terrible. There is a delay. Oh, yes, there is a delay. Sorry, that, and my response to you is much later than what you posted to me. But yes, there's definitely an audio delay, and I do hope that we can, shorten that as I get higher speed internet. That'd be great. What else? Yeah, otherwise all looking good here. Okay, so so the large scale developers, what do? They present a plan to the city. It's planned for a specific area. Needs to be conforming with the general plan. But yeah, why don't you guys sound off in text? Like, what do you think is the key difference between one of these big deals, or as is often done as a specific plan or as a master plan community, one of those, and the general plan itself? What are the key differences? And I will wait while you text, and I'll have some tea. By the way, my cat is sitting right next to me watching birds at our bird feeder. That's his sport for the day. Oh, Chris, yes, I am using OBS. Yeah, and using OBS is enabling me to manage the sort of the size of the stream, the amount of data intensity of the stream that I am actually sending to YouTube. So I think OBS is the only thing that is enabling this to work at all. Oh, great! And now they're doing construction outside. Oh well, Murphy's Law. Unfortunately, I don't have a soundproof studio. All right, so Minyoung says, I think there's some more flexibility for developers. Yes, that is true. They do gain flexibility through the use of these development agreements. But in general, when you're talking about anything from a development agreement all the way over to a specific plan, how are those different from general plans? Well, you percolate on that. I'm going to percolate on how I can get this slideshow physically smaller. Slowly we're getting there. Okay. So, Linda is saying the standards of amenities, technology and aesthetics and design. Okay, Linda, you're going to have to expand on that. That you're in the right direction. Carlos is saying there's some... let me see. They're more specific in area, yes. So they don't cover the entire jurisdiction, whereas a general plan does have to cover an entire jurisdiction. That is correct. Specific plans are just that, more specific. Okay, so yes, they don't cover the whole area. Okay, they are often specific to developers, yeah. Unique and flexible space developments, they seem to act as loopholes for developers to be able to build large-scale, unique built places. So plans have less legal requirements and are considerably more general and specific general plans. In some ways, yeah. Keep going. Go on. Meanwhile, I'm just going to keep on working on my slides here, make them small enough so you can see them all as they cycle through. All right. Seems like it allows flexibility on much of the developer invests in infrastructure instead of the local government paying for it. Yes. So actually, this specific plan is used as a mechanism for those impact fees. So if a community is saying, well, we need you to develop X, Y, and Z, like give us a school, give us a fire station, all these sorts of constraints that a community wants to put on people in terms of impacts, yeah, those can be done through specific plans. That's true. And yes, Jeffrey's pointing, he's correct. It doesn't need to have public involvement versus a general plan. It certainly doesn't need to have as much. Yeah, it's certainly not the public process that a general plan update is. That's for sure. There we go. The slides are getting closer to good. Yeah, let's see. Yeah, all right. So, I'll let those sit. Keep looking. What else? How much the developer invests in infrastructure? Had local government paying for it? Yeah. Okay, so yeah. All right, so let me then separate out some stuff that's worth thinking about specifically in terms of our class. So a general plan, as you say, general plan does cover a whole jurisdiction, and specific plans do not. They're for a specific area. That's correct. General plans also specify a variety of things a specific plan may not. General plans will specify things like, job growth or employment growth, and a specific plan doesn't do that. Yeah, levels of focus. So the other thing is that in general plans, you will have a land use element where you might specify what kind of uses and what kind of height and bulk and setbacks. So you have some general dimensional guidelines. In a specific plan, developers will often commit much, much more precisely. So they will say, whereas a general plan might say, well, we allow, 1, 2, or 3 units on a lot. In a specific plan, you will generally specify, we're going to build single-family houses here. In fact, this is roughly the plan, or maybe we have the final floor plan for them because we're home builders and here's the footprint. So specific plans tend to focus much more on physical design and on a kind of final commitment to what you're actually going to get. In a way, this kind of parallels the movement towards form-based codes, because with form-based codes, if you require people to actually specify architectural details and height and bulk of buildings, then you know literally what new development is going to look like. So it's more about design. So in a development plan, they'll actually say what the buildings are going to be. Whereas a public agency may, say what is allowable, what can actually occur in an area. A public agency in a general plan can't really specify to private landowners, this is what you must build. So with a development plan, if it's the developers themselves saying, this is what we intend to build, and we're committing to this, it usually does have to agree with the general plan, but that's not really what the developers are concerned about. What they're concerned about are two things. One is discretionary review, which bogs down forever, and discretionary review, as we've discussed, that can be extremely arbitrary. That can be an architectural review board saying, we like this or we don't like this. So discretionary review has to be pretty much finalized if a community is going to agree to a development agreement. Also, kind of sitting somewhere between discretionary review and a general plan is the CEQA environmental review. So one of the things that local people can do is, in bad faith, they can abuse the CEQA process and say, well, we want you to look at these other considerations, like your new development might cause more noise, or it might impact parking in this neighborhood. Dust, light, more kids in the school program. There's all sorts of things that people can sort of add into in challenging and forcing the extension of an environmental review. So, if you get a development agreement, on the one hand, the city knows what they're getting, right? It's like, oh, so this is where the school's going to be, that's where the park's going to be, this is the housing that's going to be there, at least a rough plan, if not a final plan. Here's the infrastructure. So as we're specifying the impact fee or the agreement that we're requiring in order to allow this development to go ahead, the developer's already telling us these are the roads we're going to build, this is their width, this is what we're going to turn over to the city. Yeah. So that's development agreements, and that's the reason why you have master planned communities. Master planning sounds like what a city does, but in this case, it's not public planning. It's actually private planning. Fortunately, we now use the term general plan to talk about the jurisdiction's own city plans. So we use a term that's different from master plans. Before this, in the 1970s, we actually used the term master plan to also talk about comprehensive planning in cities. So, all right. So I've kind of hinted also at specific plans, but specific plans can be different. So a development agreement can be a specific plan for an area, yes. But there can also be other types of specific plans. So can you give me some examples of those? Oh gosh, you know what? I just see a clip off on Thomas's comment. I'm realizing that you may have a 200 word limit. Ooh. Or not even 200 word, like 200 character limit. This is like Twitter. Huh. Well, you guys let me know if that's a problem as well. 0 to 200. Yeah. Let me just test that on my own, right? Yeah, it's 200 characters. Ooh, okay. Wow. Oh, and while you're responding, yes. So Beatrice, she's got it. So if you have a large, let's say that you have an area with multiple owners. It's actually multiple properties, but if you have multiple owners, can you give an example of what that means and who would do it? Yeah, Thomas, you're right. Yeah, you can just split the messages. It's true. Yeah, just as long as we're all aware that you've got the 200 character limit. That way, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, sorry about that. All right. Okay, so meanwhile, while you guys are responding, I'll talk about the slides that are going by as I'm showing them. So many of these are actually slides I have collected over time while doing walking tours. This is a walking tour of Telegraph Hill. Reno Street is actually a street that goes under a house, so that's the reason I photographed that. This is shows some of the bay windows that lean out over public property we talked about in walking tour. Here's some downtown. Ooh, I'm going to slow down the rate at which these slides go by, now that I'm actually talking about them. All right, now we're looking at an elevator. That's an elevator that comes from under the street. So let's see. Okay. And now we're back to Hetch Hetchy. So San Francisco's very extended infrastructure. All right, so let's see here. Now you're getting some text coming in here. Yeah, so as Guadalupe is saying, is that the city can actually do specific plans as well. Oh, okay. Right, you're Noshi. Right, thank you. Um, so I think in the Fulton and Shigley chapter, one reason they talk about a public agency doing a specific plan is that if you have, for instance, in a downtown, I'll take an example of, say, San Mateo, or some peninsula city. This could happen in Berkeley. It could happen in the East Bay. It could happen in Southern California in some small jurisdiction where they've got a bunch of owners in that area, and they don't want to do old school redevelopment, which would be to buy up all of the properties and demolish them and consolidate it into redevelopment agency ownership. They don't want to do that. All right, they want those owners to be there, but they want to do a plan for that area, which is actually a development plan, and it may mean allowing taller buildings or pre-approving more intense development. It might mean encouraging some homeowners to gang or property owners to gang together to get some development done. But the city itself may then use a specific plan to proceed with a development process with multiple owners present. So I think that, I'm pretty sure that the city of Berkeley just did a specific plan in order to then significantly remodel their downtown. By the way, that's not the sound you're hearing outside. That's, I don't know. That's somebody cutting the concrete in the sidewalk in front of my building. Don't worry. So what the city of Berkeley has done is they have changed Shattuck avenues. So they eliminated a one-way pair, and so now the traffic is all going two ways on a single right-of-way in the downtown. They're allowing some taller buildings, which they haven't allowed since the 1970s. They're doing a 17-story hotel and conference center. They encourage freight and salvage to move into the downtown as part of an entertainment district right near the downtown. So these are things that they can do where they can work with landowners and they can say, we're going to kind of act as a developer in a way. We're not going to do the whole bulldoze and start fresh the way that the redevelopment agency did in San Francisco in the Fillmore district and kind of trashed it in the process. But yeah, specific plans can be used that way. All right, let me see what else you're saying. Do specific plans take longer than normal plans for approval, or are they faster? So if a city is doing a specific plan, like Berkeley doing a downtown plan, or say San Mateo or some Southern California city doing a downtown plan, if it's the public agency doing it, it goes through the same intensity of public review. And in fact, it can go through a couple of rounds of voting by initiative by people who say, we want to put a ballot before the city or before the county, either blocking or encouraging this. Usually blocking. People don't usually put a measure up there saying, yeah, we're really in favor of this, but they will often put up measures saying, we're trying to block the city from proceeding with some sort of development in its downtown. And oftentimes the arguments they will use are the terrible mistakes that were done with redevelopment. And even to this day, is it Philip? I think you were talking about this, where we're trying to deal with a housing crisis, and the problem with building a bunch of new housing is that often increases prices around there. So then you may actually increase rent hikes and evictions near the place you've built a bunch of new housing. So there's a very messy issue there. You can't just say we're going to treat this as a simple supply and demand problem. We're just going to increase the supply and that's going to solve our housing problem. You can't build your way out of a housing crisis. If you only treat that one variable, it doesn't help. It maybe years from now it will, maybe 20 or 30 years from now. If we build housing right now like Matt, maybe 30 years from now it will help. But for the foreseeable future, no, that alone is not enough. So yeah, single variable solutions not so healthy. Okay. All right, so Jeffrey's talking about, so the Transbay redevelopment in San Francisco was not done like a redevelopment agency redevelopment. It was done with multiple owners. They remained in place, and there was some public right-of-way stuff that was done, tearing down or remodeling things like the bus off-ramp that comes off of the Bay Bridge and then comes into the Transbay Terminal. That was remodeled. So there was public right-of-way stuff that was changed. There was a lot of private owner stuff that was changed. So yeah, that's an example of a specific plan. Yeah, so Andre, yeah, but, transit-oriented development, yeah, that specific plans may be done specifically for that. So, for instance, if you've got a BART station, or in another part of the state, some other transit station, so like the light rail system in Sacramento, or in San Diego, or the variety of things they're putting in Los Angeles. Yeah, you might do a station area plan, which is a specific plan around the station, where again, you're not doing redevelopment, you're not just clearing everything out, but you do want to work with the people there to densify and increase walkability. You might, as the city, you might amend the general plan specifically for transit-oriented development, because you want to increase walkability, and the specific ways to increase walkability have to do with usually getting pretty high density residential stacked on top of commercial. It's not always the case, so I don't want to assume that's always the solution. Sometimes housing densification is also not the solution. Depends on your local conditions always. But oftentimes that will work. But if you need to do mixed use development, as we've discussed, land use planning by default in this country is single use, and so you may need to do an overlay district for that area, allowing commercial in an area that was residential, or allowing residential in an area that was known as commercial. Yeah, let me see what else about that. But in any case, if the public agency is doing the specific plan update, they may then revise a bit on the general plan, and specifically say the zoning map, in order to allow that to proceed. All right, let me look at your comments again. Oh yeah, Brian. Oh yes, that's noticeably. You've delivered food in Reno. So that picture as it goes by in the slideshow, just so you know, obviously in San Francisco, you can have bay windows lean out of the public property, but in a couple of places there were, they're sort of big blocks, and they subdivided them with some parcels that are sort of in the middle. And to access those, you've got to have a little street that goes through, but the homeowner might have gotten the right to build clear across their property, and so then you have to have sort of an easement. You've got an actual public street that goes underneath a private building. So in that case, it's private property completely extending over public property. It's fairly common in Italian cities because they were very dense. They're known as sottoporteggi in Italy, or a single one would be a sottoporteggio. So a portage way underneath the building. And in Byzantine development codes, so in the ancient Byzantine Empire, and therefore inherited in Muslim cities, there are specific codes. So what you have to do is, if you have your building extend out over an alleyway, then on the far side where that building is adjacent to another property, you have to put posts or a wall down, so you're supporting your building over on the other side of the right-of-way. And you have to maintain the sort of safety of that right-of-way in terms of structure, in terms of fire safety, because your building is now completely over it. And if you look again at this picture of Reno, you'll see that it's an arch in that building, and that's because that building does actually structurally extend clear across. It has posts on the far side adjacent to the next property. So the homeowner that's over Reno Way, they are following exactly those same codes from the Byzantine and Muslim practices. So I've even seen that as recently as, I think, 2007 in Kabul. I saw some new construction going right over the public right-of-way. So there's a street that went underneath, and when somebody extended their rooms clear over that public right-of-way, they put posts down on the far side to support it. So it's the same practice whether you're in Kabul or here. Let me see. Yeah. So naturally, that's awesome. I'm glad you got to see Reno. Let me see. Local governments may extract these extraordinary concessions because development agreements are exempt from the post-null nexus requirement and Dolan's rough proportionality test. Could you explain what this means? Oh, yeah. Well, since they are actively negotiated between the jurisdiction and the land developer, um, rather than having a city on its side sort of formulate the whole impact fee and then say, okay, it's going to be $12,000 per unit, you actually have a lot more negotiation. So it's it's exempt from Dolan, but it's exempt because they're compelled to negotiate actively with the city for that. So here is also a real drawback to the development agreements. So specific plans, what we talked about, that could be done by a city and that could be small owners, fine. With development agreements, unfortunately, the only people that really have the resources to do a development agreement are large land developers like Pulte or Kaufman and Broad, or there's a couple of other large-scale developers out there that can do that. But what it means is that it really, really favors big business. And it's an easier, so it's kind of like socialism for the rich. It's if your business is big enough, it's actually easier for you to negotiate large bulk developments and to profit from those. Whereas if you were developing, 4 or 5 houses or some small sort of parcel, you probably don't have the resources to do the kind of master planning necessary to get a city to agree to a development agreement. So that's the real downside to development agreements, and it's a serious one. So yeah. The other thing about development agreements is we touched upon this. Oh yeah, so Paulette was asking about specific plans. Yeah, so specific plans are not only used by developers but also by the city. Yes, that's true. So they can be public, or a development agreement itself can be a specific plan. So a master plan community, that can be a specific plan in an area. But development agreements themselves, we're typically talking about a large-scale private side commitment of some pattern development to the city, and when you have that, it's a workaround, but it's a workaround that only developers with a lot of resources can exploit. Oh yeah. So Carlos, thank you for that. So SFGov, I believe it's sfgov.org. Is that right, or is it sf.gov? Hold on. Can you update that so yeah, you can see some development agreements there. So for those of you particularly who are interested in San Francisco politics, take a look at those. San Francisco is a little bit its own animal in terms of development statewide. Other cities might be more typical, like say, I was thinking about San Mateo because I've studied it recently, but most other cities are a bit different because they are a city inside of a county. So, does the multiple level of jurisdictions mean something? Yeah, there's ways in which San Francisco is always a little bit different, but it's definitely worth looking. Oh, yeah. So, Carlos, I'm not sure if the connection is slow. That might be worth specifying. I think the problem is delay, which, yes, that's a version of slow. And I think the delay may be on my end. So we shall see. So this Wednesday afternoon, we have one more class to go through with this setup as it is, but on Wednesday afternoon, I should have fiber optic at my house. So that will eliminate at least that particular obstacle. On the other hand, there's probably some pretty intense YouTube usage going on right now. People binge watching the TV shows they didn't watch before they got quarantined to the house. So yeah, it may be that the servers in the Bay Area as a whole may be heavily loaded right now. We shall see. Yeah. Okay. So where was I? Let me pick up my train of thought again about specific plans develop. Yeah, general plans. Oh, yeah. So here's, that's Reno right there. So that's what Reno looks like when you're viewing it straight on. So you can see the posts on the right side next to the gray building with the square bays. And then, yeah, you can walk straight through. So, yeah, you can see how Reno has that standard Soto Porteggio layout. So here was the thing I was also concerned about. We talked about how throughout California and throughout the United States, it's really common for real estate agents to be serving on city councils. So you have the land development interest already part of city government, and then you have large-scale land developers coming in to negotiate deals with them. And through a development agreement, the city may get a commitment, and maybe that's a good one for economic development, but it's a workaround that undermines the intent of CEQA. So as much as I might critique CEQA for bad faith abuses, where it's just used to block housing because people don't want housing, the advantage of CEQA was that it was an institutionalized way. Oh, by the way, this is a street elevator on the slide. So, goes down underground, so the building next door, they can, or adjacent to it, they can access underground from the street. It's an easier way to load freight in from the sidewalk if you don't have an alley behind your building. Okay, so what environmental review can do well is get developers to think a bit harder about whether they can design well. And sometimes developers, what they're going to put in is going to be a serious problem for the neighbors. Really bright billboards, illuminated LED billboards, those are a problem. A building that does cast a shadow on a neighbor's lot, it's a problem. And if it could have just been repositioned so that neighbor could get natural daylight, why not? If you could do something with a curb cut or parking to make things more livable for the neighborhood, why not? If you can actually think it through and improve things by having neighbors have how to put this, an institutionalized, formalized way of giving input, then yeah, CEQA can work really well. And I think so what I worry about with our housing crisis now and how we may respond to it is that people may just throw out CEQA entirely. And that's throwing out the baby with the bathwater. So it would be better to figure out what are ways to revise CEQA implementation so that it does actually fit how it was originally intended. And as we discussed a few weeks ago, part of the challenge is that the original intent had to do with an understanding of environment at that time, which is when you have a lot of trees and green around you, that must be a good environment. And I'll let somebody post a comment about why that's not necessarily good environmental practice. But the formal notification process and the fact that you do compel a developer to at least think through how could they mitigate the development, how could they make things work better or avoid a particular environmental impact, that's very worthwhile to do. Yeah, so then the problem with development agreements is that if you've got a city council and a big developer and they're all kind of best friends, then they may effectively do an end run around public review, around having other sorts of community input for the development, and pow, you get a whole set of hundreds of houses done, and the community largely ignored in the process. All right, so let's see here. Is my streaming? Whoa, up, down, down. I just want to see. So Carlos. The last text I see is Carlos talking about the slow connection. All right. What else do you guys want to look at in this particular chapter? I'm going to take a look. I've got my trusty Fulton Shigley here. we've covered, I think, the key concepts. Oh, so vested rights, we should cover that term, particularly because one of you was talking about the question of whether it's sort of like a security deposit, and it is. It is. All right, so we've got our development agreements, with specific towns. Yeah, for transit-oriented development, yep. That's one reason to use specific plans to redo. Types of specific plans, master plan developments, specific plans, the basics. Yeah. Well, all right. So, just to review, and you will see this also in international planning. A lot of places take planning literally, meaning that they're more interested in urban design than they are in policy formulation and being transparent about policy intervention. Mostly example of specific plan. California High-Speed Rail. Yeah. Agency writes bi-yearly progress reports on this public stakeholders and state legislature. Right. Yeah. I hadn't thought about that. So the California High-Speed Rail as a specific plan is an example kind of like Tahoe Basin collective management. This is a specific plan which spans multiple jurisdictions. So specific plans can be used for that as well. So if you can imagine you're trying to run a high-speed rail all the way from San Francisco to Los Angeles, the general plan as a planning instrument doesn't make sense. Even the circulation element within general plans does not make sense because we started out with planning being jurisdiction specific. It's just the instrument is just used in a different way, whereas a specific plan doesn't have that particular history nor that particular mandate. So you can use it across multiple geographies. I suppose. Yeah, in principle, when the Coastal Conservation Act was passed, and the California Coastal Commission got the authorization to intervene significantly in land use planning within local jurisdictions and on individual properties within the coastal zone. They could have done a specific plan for the entire California coast. As far as I know, they did not. That's something I'll look up after this call. I don't think they did one for the entire coast, but in a way, because they already have a mandate for, we need access, so we already have planning criteria for what we're supposed to do and how we're going to intervene on all these properties along the coast. In a way, that is kind of a specific plan. And it's along the entire length of the California coast. So yeah, that's also a multi-jurisdiction equivalent to a specific plan, if not already one by name. Whoa, by the way, that's my cat. Yeah, say hello to Tamalpais. That's the cat. Hey, Tam, I'm grabbing your tail. Yeah, you want to show them your tail? No, you don't want to now that you've walked past me, huh? Okay. Right, let's see. For each development plans create. So Austin, let's see. Yeah, the negotiations, they're kind of backroom negotiations. They lock out citizen groups. Oh, yes. And also in your comment, thank you, somebody also pointed this out. So the development agreement is intended to reduce risk. And so the developer makes commitments, this is what we're going to do in this area. Now imagine that the developer says, we're going to do 500 single-family houses. They're going to be big, right? They're going to be, say, 3,000 square feet, a sort of typical American house today. And they're going to have big setbacks, and it's going to be low density. So let's say that they put in that development agreement. They get the agreement from the city, and so they've got mutual commitments on this, and that's, say, 2005. Let's say they couldn't develop it for years, and so now 50 years later, they're coming back and they're saying, okay, so we have the development agreement, we want to do that now. The city might say, well, okay, but SB 375 was passed. We have a climate action plan. We're trying to do more pedestrian-oriented development. So we actually would like you to do higher density development in that area. Now, under the regular updating process of a general plan, the city has the authority to do that. They have the authority to demand that private landowners actually do reconsider how they might do something before they put in for a building permit application. But if you have a development agreement in place, yeah, Thomas, you've pointed out exactly the same thing. Yeah, so the mountain house example. Yeah, it's now a sprawling suburban island. So yeah, the city may have changed its form policies. A new city council might have different attitudes about it. You might actually have a change in the prevailing market preferences as well. So, people of your generation tend to want places that are denser and walkable and more urban. And so the city might say, well, yeah, I know we have this development agreement. Yeah, I know that you could do single family housing, but we think it might fail and we don't want to have a half-empty development. And it's not always that developers know best what's going to sell. The city may be watching what's going on around them saying, we don't want to have some sort of white elephant in our community. Please respond to changing market conditions, changing preferences of Californians. So there could be that as well. Yeah, so unpredictable climate, that's another example. So, now that we have a 12-month, round the year sort of fire season, they might have, in some sort of foothill community in the Sierra Nevada or, in the hills here in the Bay Area or in Southern California, they may have approved a development agreement for a bunch of housing, and now the city might say, well, we don't want to endanger the people that are going to buy that. We also don't want to endanger our own firefighters, having them fighting, to protect houses. They're not there now. We don't want them there in the future. We don't want to put our firefighters at risk. If there's a major fire, we'd rather have our emergency services committed to responding down in the city itself in a place where, that's not in the hills. So that could be another thing. So climate change also may cause a problem. So it's not just the backroom deals, but it's also, change conditions and the lock-in of both the city and the developer with the agreement. So there's a downside to risk mitigation. So here's something I'm curious about then. What would you guys recommend now that you've seen the workaround that cities and developers have developed in practice? What do you think would be a better alternative? Yeah, thank you, Notre. Yeah, so California High-Speed Rail accepting online comments for their 2020 business plan. Yeah, and now that we're all online much more, go and check it out. Notice, do you want to put the link in the comments? I don't know if YouTube will allow that. Maybe everybody should just Google it themselves. So CAHSR, California High Speed Rail. Yeah, take a look on your own. Yeah, I know that Google can flag comments that have links in them. Sorry. Likewise, sf.gov. Let me see. Yeah, I'm gonna peek myself here. So sf.gov. Yeah, it's just sf.gov. Oh, yeah, there's that top page. San Francisco's responded to COVID-19. Wash your hands. Yes, wash your hands after this video. You've been touching the keyboard. See, there's a new website. This is the new citywide website. Learn more. The new website for San Francisco. All right, so yeah, you too can investigate in that and see what you find there in terms of looking at specific plans. What else? Oh yeah. Okay. Thank you, Carlos. Thank you for letting me know. So nobody can put nobody can put links into the comments. Oh, So, Beatrice, you were asking about expand on what vested rights are. So, to vest means to lock in. It means you've committed something. So, for instance, if you have a retirement fund and you get vested in, so now your employer is contributing much more to your retirement. That's because it's sort of mutual commitment. In the case of vested rights, there's a chapter which I didn't have you guys read, but it has to do with old parcel subdivision maps. So California has a kind of an ugly history of kind of runaway, crazy land development subdivisions that were done in the 19th century. But if you find one of those subdivision maps for the property that you own, you can then come to the community and say, hey, I've got this map from 1894 on this raggedy piece of paper that says I could subdivide this property into 12 different parcels. Technically, the city used to have to prove otherwise to say no. Otherwise, you already were permitted that sort of Google. All right, so Google CAHSR 2020 business plan. Thank you. Yeah, so that's right. We could put Google search terms into the comments. Brilliant. Brilliant, yeah, because that's just plain text. Yes, of course, you can use another search engine. You don't have to use Google, but most of us do that. You could use Bing. Who knows what results you would get? Or DuckDuckGo. Haven't tried it. Might work great. Okay, so when the jurisdiction and the developer agree to a development agreement, then that becomes a contract, a committed contract, and the city would be liable for a lawsuit if they break that contract. So the rights to development become vested because both the city and the developer agree that they're going to do whatever it is they're going to do in this development agreement. It's going to be higher density housing, or lower density housing, or mixed use, or not mixed use. Whatever was committed in the agreement. Greenhouses, anything like that. Then that gets locked in. That gets vested, and it means that a developer has a prior agreement. So when they come back and say, okay, now we're going to develop it, and here's some specific, mechanical drawings and architectural drawings we need to give you. These are the final ones we're actually going to build with. They are consistent with what we put in the development agreement. They're just the final details, how we'll actually build this. Are we going to use, shingle on the roofs, or are we going to use, metal or tile roofing? Some details like that might be put into the final design. But so long as they are not breaking the agreement, they're actually staying with whatever they agreed to, then the city has to agree to that as well, even if a bunch of neighbors, raise complaints, because they have their rights locked in. So that's what vested rights means. Yeah. Okay, so let me think what else. I think I'm going to wrap up class now at noon rather than at 12:15, partly because this was a pretty short chapter that we were looking at, and I just wanted to make sure people could participate. That has worked. The one other thing I'm thinking is that it may help if you guys email me. Maybe. I was debating about whether you should email me your plain emails. The reason I'm asking is just that we had some delay in iLearn. If I put out a general announcement on the iLearn, whether you guys will get the email in time. So it may make more sense to just email you guys directly. But I might be able to do that straight into your SF State emails from my own email client. I may not have to use iLearn, and I think it won't complain. So I think I can do that. If you want me to email to your own personal email account, let me know. Okay, yeah, they're calling a Bay Area shelter in place, just so everyone knows. I'll take a look at that as well. Is that, Heather, I'm wondering if this shelter in place has to do with sort of a informal self-quarantining for the COVID-19 outbreak. It might be. We certainly have, quite a few cases confirmed in all of the counties around here. Last I saw yesterday, already 2 deaths in Santa Clara County, in San Jose. There's the period in Chronicle. Notice he's talking about importing data to Arcgis. I wonder what this is about. Ooh, maybe we should talk about that. I will bring that up for next time. Yeah, might want to get you guys to be using some GIS, but we haven't brought that up today. Let's see. Min Young is asking, Silicon Valley, like Google Campus, also went through specific plans development agreements. How's the plan allowed without housing supply? Oh, yes. Oh, so in answer to Min Young's comment about Google, as it happens, I was taking a San Francisco State University class down to look at Google and LinkedIn because I wanted them to see the other end of all of these Google buses, and because it irritates San Franciscans, and they're like, what is this? What's going on down in Google? Why are they sending these Google buses up to San Francisco? And the folks at Google were pretty clear. They said, look, if we didn't do that, then we'd have all these people driving from San Francisco down to Google. So this is our carbon reduction plan. It's the equivalent of a mass transit system. It's just that they know they can't wait for BART and Caltrain to sort things out. So they felt they needed to act. However, while we were down there, we were watching Google and LinkedIn try to negotiate with the city of Mountain View to allow for housing inside their business park. So, just so you know, both Google and LinkedIn have buildings in sort of an industrial office park on the north side of Highway 101. So all of the residential areas except for 1 trailer park and 4 old houses. Everything else is on the south side of 101 up towards the hills. However, the city of Mountain View had a sort of business development plan, so they had this business park out there on the north side of 101. I think they started developing it in the 1970s. It kind of sputtered along for a while until finally the tech boom hit. And Google was actually not the first user of some of its fancy buildings. Silicon Graphics used them, and they're now long since gone. So anyway, just so you know. But in 2015, Google and LinkedIn were desperately begging the city of Mountain View to allow housing in the Googleplex, in the area where they owned a bunch of buildings and a bunch of real estate. And the city of Mountain View said no. They were trying to develop as much as 32,000 units of housing at the time. And yes, they wanted to use a specific plan for that process. And the city of Mountain View said no. And yeah, I watched older white suburban homeowners say, we think there's too much traffic on the highway anyway, so Google should just start setting up branch offices in other places and start relocating away from Mountain View. Whereas, 99.5% of the cities across the country would be desperate to attract business. These folks in Mountain View who are getting massive tax revenue from having Google there are taking it for granted to the degree that they're just saying, well, we want all of these benefits, but we're just going to keep other people out. Incredibly selfish, incredibly privileged, and it was so striking to see how they had no idea that they were expressing privilege. They just think of themselves as cutesy little retiree homeowners, and in a quaint suburban area. It's kind of amazing. Like the amount of disconnect is amazing when you see it in person. But yeah, they do use specific plans. And the other side, the downside of that as well, is that you get these monster businesses in places like Mountain View. There's a whole series of jurisdictions down there that have one huge tech company in them for Menlo Park, it's Facebook. For Cupertino, it's Apple. For Los Gatos, which used to be a tiny little town, it's Netflix. So each of these jurisdictions has one huge, incredibly well-resourced corporation in that town, and you can imagine the development agreement pressures there. Although I certainly sided with Google for, they're wanting to have housing in the Googleplex to reduce the amount of commuting. I'm down with that. But I was also aware that Google was trying to encourage certain people to run for the city council in Mountain View to try to overturn the obstruction of development. And, in an open democracy, we've seen this all over the place where well-resourced people can, either move into elected position or fund other people moving into elected position. But none of us like that. In this specific case, if it's for more housing, I understand it. That would be a good thing. Maybe Google wanted to do some other development stuff I wasn't paying attention to, and maybe that's not entirely ethical. But in terms of legality, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So that's a problem, especially when you stick to the Euclidean principle in zoning and say, it's only local jurisdictions that have the right to zone, and then you have a $1 trillion corporation like Apple sitting in your town with 20,000 employees in your town and nothing else even in the same order of magnitude in your town, then it can become kind of a company town. It can become extremely lopsided negotiations. So whereas, say, the Metropolitan Transportation Commission or our regional Bay Area government could push back against somebody like Apple, Campbell, then it gets hard. I mean, for the moment, single-family homeowners feel like they're being anti-development champions by, holding the big corporations at bay. Unfortunately, if what they're doing is succeeding in preventing housing development, in other ways, maybe they are doing heroic work. But unfortunately, then that's also a very, very lopsided battle on their part. Yeah. So let me see. I saw Notchley was making some comments here. Yeah, so Notchley is correct that if you fill out the census online, that's fine for you if you have internet access. If you're fairly tech savvy, yes, we may get some undercounts. God knows the homeless people living down at the end of University Avenue near me, I don't know how they're going to get counted. Yeah. Oh, okay. So I think this is Seth De Fonseca. He's saying, yeah, the shelter in place has to do with the. I'm assuming we're talking about the COVID outbreak, that we've got a shelter in place there. Yeah. Yeah. Well, in the long run, that is. Shelter in place is in the long term is generally what we need to do to manage the rate of spread of this virus. And it is, I think, still a subspecies of cold, which means it's incredibly contagious. So sooner or later we will probably all get it unless somebody pulls off a miracle and figures out some effective vaccine against cold, something we've never done before. But then the real key question is, what is the rate of infection? So sheltering in place makes sense if you can. It's why I dashed down to Orange County yesterday to collect up my daughter from college, because her college was pretty much going online. And so on the one hand, maybe that will slow when we get this virus, or on the other hand, if we get it sooner, then by staying at home, we're reducing the amount we expose other people. So yeah, it cuts both ways. Okay, so Paulette is asking about whether the GIS program is available on iPads. No, so far as I know, it's not. ArcGIS only runs on Windows, and if you have a Mac that's powerful enough, you can run a Windows shell in your Mac, and then you can run ArcGIS inside the Mac. QGIS runs natively on Windows, Mac OS, and Linux OS. If you want to do a little bit of GIS processing, you can do that on an iPad, but really through a browser window. So for that, you can even look at the fact finder website of the United States Census. So it's looked for Fact Finder 2. I'll just put that down. I think it's actually American Fact Finder, and that is the U.S. Census Data Portal. So we actually do teach about that in the USP program in USP 492 and 493. If you guys would like me to give you a little bit of orientation on that, I'd be happy to do so. Oh, I see. So Brian, notice you're concerned that we're using questionable population data for the general plan, particularly to address housing, mental health, transportation. Yes, this is a long-term issue. That's true. It's been a big concern, not just in terms of homeless population, but also, you know, populations that have been harassed. So, for instance, I had a student a year ago who said, you know, he's from Latin American ancestry. He's a U.S. citizen. He served in the military. I mean, he's completely American. But because he's Latino, he felt nervous about ICE and you know, immigration, La Migra, as it was called, and it was, you know, it's painful to hear about. But just, you know, hearing that, like, they just made him uncomfortable because he felt like they might just misidentify him and try to deport him to Mexico, which would be a serious problem for him because he doesn't speak much Spanish, among other things, like a massive human rights violation. But because of concern about harassment from ICE and even just from the local police cooperating with ICE, I do really worry about whether Latin Americans in California are going to underreport. And that's a massive ethical concern. I mean, we're talking now about the largest group in our state, so that, you know, it's not exactly a majority yet, but, you know, Latinos are, you know, 33% of the California population, and underreporting, particularly for populations that feel vulnerable and less entitled, means they then do get less resources. So yeah, that's a very serious concern for planning overall. How resources are allocated based on population. Yeah, it's a general concern and a valid one. Oh, so did I miss something earlier when you were talking about GIS? What did I miss up here? Hold on. Shelter in place. Looks like there's a bit of crosstalk. Yeah. All right. Okay. So I'm gonna stop the video in just a minute or two. But I would like you guys to sound off if you want to talk about using GIS and also using American Fact Finder. If there are things that you want to suggest and that you can do in your own community in terms of census response, let's talk about that as well. Since you're a pretty diverse body of students, maybe collectively we've got some unusual advantage that we can do in terms of thinking about outreach. Yeah. It is going to be a problem if we're all sheltering in place, especially in terms of the census response. So we want to make sure we get, you know, full representation of everybody, get everybody counted. That's a major planning issue. Yeah. So there's that sort of the ethics and activism question around the census. The GIS question is separate. If you guys want to learn GIS, we can talk about that. Yeah. Okay, so one other thing that I'm thinking about is I'm going to put my Skype handle up. It is Pietro Calgero, and that is my Skype handle. The reason I'm doing that is that for office hours, I think I want to use Skype. I'd be happy to use Zoom. It's just I have no objection to Zoom per se. It's just that I had learned other technologies previously, and so unless I'm really convinced that a technology is superior, I'm a little slow to go, how do I use the buttons on this one? So I'm happy to use that, particularly if you guys want me to, but I'm going to turn on Skype and be watching that this afternoon as a way of doing my office hours. Yeah. And unless there's anything else, I think we will stop this for now. I'm going to scan the next chapter to put that up so we can catch back up on the reading. Yeah, let me see. Yes. Yes, Notchley. Yes. Well said. Yeah. Inadequate health services may in part be due to undercount from the last census, although, yeah, there's other barriers to having decent health services. I mean, most generally because we don't have a national health system. But yeah, so here's one thing I would like you to do in how you are personally all dealing with the COVID-19 outbreak. I would like all of you to think about, well, what do we need to do in terms of health? And that's not just should we have Medicare for all, should we have a national health service. Keep in mind that Italy has a national health service, and they're really, really struggling with this COVID-19 outbreak. But it may mean that Italians are accessing healthcare more easily, but it's not a panacea. So are there other things that we need to do in terms of health policy, especially at the local urban level? So often people think about it as a national policy, but really locally, what can we do? And that might be worth discussing as well. So with that, I'm going to sign off and stop the stream. Thank you all for participating, and I will see you again soon online.